So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Victoria Stewart-Todd, and I'm the director of the Kensington Chelsea Foundation. We're joined this morning by Susan Rudnik, give us a wave, Susan, from LCAT, and Anne from Future Men. But I'll probably introduce them in a minute. They're going to give us a bit of an overview of the work that they're delivering in Kensington and Chelsea that we've recently agreed to partner with them on. But before we get into that, I wanted to just give you an overview on the K+C Foundation's mental health and education programs, to put a bit of context around these partnerships and to explain why these issues are so important to us. And then I'll introduce the speakers who are going to tell us a bit more about their work specifically. There is an opportunity at the end to ask questions. Some people have submitted a couple of questions already, but you can continue to do that in the chat function, and then we'll take all the questions at the end. We will finish on time, so if we haven't had time to get through all the questions, we can always answer them privately by email or something like that if that's of interest. So I wanted to start just by giving you the context for this webinar. So we've just launched, the Kensington and Chelsea Foundation has just launched 16 new partnerships to deliver projects in the borough that we think will make a real impact and make a difference to local residents. So 8 of those projects are focused on improving educational outcomes for young people who live in the borough, and another 8 are designed to support residents who are struggling with poor mental health. So today's webinar is an opportunity to hear from 2 of those projects in particular, and ask any questions. But before we get onto that part, I wanted to give a bit of background on how we ended up selecting these partnerships, and why this work does matter to us so much. I think many of you will have heard of or read our research report that we launched at the end of last year, which is called Poverty and Prosperity in Kensington and Chelsea. The research indicated some of the key drivers behind the enormous inequalities that we see in our community, and we've used those findings to try and drive our strategy for the next 3 to 5 years, and to identify some of the key challenges and where we feel we can make a difference as a foundation. And 2 areas that came out loud and clear from the research as significant challenges in the borough were mental health and education. So the picture for children and young people who are growing up in Kensington and Chelsea is one of vastly different educational opportunities and outcomes. We have this really staggering situation where nearly half the children in the borough attend private school, which compares to a national average of about 9%, so it's enormous. But at the same time, 1 in 4 children in the borough live in poverty, and the number of children on free school meals has doubled over the past 4 years. So we're seeing really different pictures and pathways for children, depending on their economic background and social status. And Kensington and Chelsea also has the highest rate of school exclusions in London. And our research found that there was a clear bias in some of the exclusions. So Black or mixed race children were twice as likely to be excluded as their peers, and children with special educational needs were 3 times as likely to be excluded. And the reason that's important, and I'm sure Anne and Susan can shed a bit more light on this too, is that school exclusion is a pathway to further social exclusion. There's a really well-evidenced pathway actually from school exclusion to loneliness and isolation, to gang exploitation, to prison. And if you joined slightly earlier, you'll have heard we were just chatting about that very thing. So it's not just about poor outcomes for the excluded child, which are important enough. It's also about the wider social ramifications, an increase in youth crime and youth violence if school exclusions continue. So we decided as a foundation, we've been working on issues affecting children and young people for a long time. And we really decided after the research, we wanted to narrow down our focus and work specifically with children who'd either been excluded from school or who are at risk of exclusion, and see if we can kind of break this cycle and help to reduce exclusions, and also support those who are already on that pathway to have better life outcomes and to not end up in prison for the long term. So we launched our education portfolio in spring, and we chose 8 projects which we believe have the best chance of achieving real impact in this area over the next 3 years. And Anne's project was one of those, so she's going to tell us a bit more about that in a minute. And then in terms of mental health, our research found that overall the borough has very poor mental health scores. So we rate in the lowest 20% of local authorities for mental health. And we particularly scored poorly on some very specific issues like residents feeling a sense of belonging in their local community, feeling isolated and feeling lonely. We found that anxiety rates are very, very high in Kensington and Chelsea. They sort of peaked after the Grenfell Tower fire and then stayed at that level throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And they're just starting to drop very slightly, but they're still significantly higher than both London and national averages. And we also found, as well as the kind of the data that came through in the research, we spoke to lots of our charity partners and we heard directly from them that youth mental health is at crisis point in our community. Chelsea and Westminster Hospital have recently launched a new mental health programme called Best for You, and that's really to address this issue. They are seeing an epidemic of young people turning up in A&E, having self-harmed, having attempted suicide, and it's not getting any better. So they're really putting a lot of resource into trying to tackle this. So mental health became another priority for the foundation. And we launched our new mental health portfolio with 8 projects this spring. The idea being we wanted to offer really targeted and tailored individualised support to people who are struggling with mental health. And Susan's going to tell us a bit more about her project in a minute. But first, I will stop talking because nobody likes hearing from me. I'm not the interesting one in this webinar. And I'm going to ask Anne to talk to us first. So Anne is heading up the Boys Development Programme at an organisation called Future Men. So we have partnered with them for the next 3 years to work on a local project supporting young men in our borough. So Anne, do you want to tell us a bit more about the project that you're partnering with us on, the issues you're trying to address and the young people that you work with?
Yes, morning everyone. I am just to give you a bit of context. Our organisation is we're a men's organisation. We support young men and boys across the different areas. We have our community engagement and outreach element of the work, which is, as the name suggests, we work within the community with young men and boys. We have our fathers strand of work where we are working with young fathers and young fathers. We have our Fathers for Futures programme, which is like a antenatal classes for men. And we have our Boys Development Programme, which is delivered in schools for boys between the ages of 10 and 16. So starting in final year 6 of primary school and transitioning into secondary school in year 7 all the way up to year 11. Although the bulk of our work is in year 6 to year 7 transition, and then we tend to go up to year 9. That's what the schools tend to want. But we do have the ability to go up to year 7. Up to year 11, sorry, which is the end of secondary school. And the need that is there is boys. The statistics do bear out the fact that boys they achieve less well than girls at school. They are at greater risk of exclusion, and these things are borne out in the work that we are doing and our experiences of what we see. I've been with the organisation for 12 years now, always in this team. So I've seen the difference and the trends that come. And as I've started in 2010 versus now, we are seeing a much, much higher risk of boys being excluded from school for poor or challenging behaviour. And it's really almost not recognisable from the way it was when I started in 2010. So we support boys in schools to really, we want to get them through. We want to avoid permanent exclusions. We want to get them ambitious about education and lifting their aspirations for what they can achieve, and creating a greater attachment to school. The areas we go into are those with the highest levels of need. We will look at the borough maps. We'll look at the areas with the highest levels of deprivation. We'll go into primary schools where perhaps there's a higher levels of free school meals, and those are the areas that we work in. What we will do is we'll target a secondary school and then the primary feeder schools around it, so that we can maintain some sort of continuity, where if should the children be with us in year 6 and then move to a primary school, a secondary school that we are already in. So our project is our project is 6 to 12 weeks, group and or one-to-one interventions. So initially there was a lot more requests from schools for group interventions because that was what they thought, they thought that was what was needed, and the boys it was more social, and it was more getting them together to work things out and to look at different areas of that they needed support with. And subsequently, I'd say in the last maybe 5-10 years, we're seeing a lot more, sorry, in the past 5 years, let's go for 5 years, we're seeing a higher level of need for one-to-one interventions. And since the pandemic, it's really, we've hardly, a lot of schools, they don't do groups with us anymore. It's all one-to-one. So our program looks at, we have a framework that we operate within, and then we populate the depth that we go into based on the young people that we are working with. So, for example, we've got 6 areas that we will cover over the 6 weeks in a group intervention. We've got the introduction itself. Before we meet the young people, we will see them one-to-one to explain who we are, talk to them a little bit, and explain what we're doing, and actually to clarify with them the fact that they're not in trouble. That they haven't done anything wrong, they haven't been selected because they've done something wrong, because sometimes they can think that, and we are very good at explaining why we come to them and what we're about doing, and to their parents as well. So we have the initial introduction before we bring them together, and then when we bring them together, there's an introduction to the program. We look at masculinity and boys' development is another area of a topic that we cover, managing emotions, communication, and goals and aspirations. And we look at particular areas where, when we look at the data for school exclusion, it tends to be around challenging or conflicting behaviour with members of staff. That will be one of the main reasons why a young person will get into a situation where they're possibly at risk of a permanent exclusion. And, it's quite often simple things around communication and the ability to manage your emotions, to know what your triggers are. We go through all of those things with them. We look at conflicts as well, managing conflict, whether it be between them and the teacher or them and other young people within school and outside in the community, because as young boys get older, sometimes the risks become more of the risks and challenges are more around other young people of their own age, in their own communities, rather than necessarily the teachers. It shifts as they go through school where the risk is. And running through all of that, we've got the areas of points of masculinity that are relevant to these boys as they're growing up, the goals and the aspirations. We work across about 5 different boroughs for the boys development programme across London, and they're very different, but they have a lot of the problems are the same, but we do have very different demographics. So North Kensington is very different to Bermondsey. We've got very different groups of boys that come from those areas. We kind of, when we look at the need that we see and the need that everybody identifies and understands, when we speak to teachers, they will often tell us that when a child comes into school in reception, they can already see which children have got the language skills, which children have been read to, which children have had all the benefits of perhaps what we would expect all young people to have. And as they go through school, the challenges sort of emerge. And for us, we think we're all about early interventions. We see, because we have a community engagement and outreach strand of our work, we see what happens when young people fall out of education, or where they don't have the same privileges as others, because once they're excluded from a school, the school no longer has to see what happens to them. We actually have witness to what comes next, and it's breathtaking in its ferocity and in its speed of a downward trajectory. It's shocking if you ever witness it. And we are really all about, in terms of boys in school, avoiding that. We know that some children will be excluded because they can't manage in mainstream, but we really want to keep those numbers down to a very bare minimum. And we will do everything we can, working with the schools that we are in, where we have funding that's not just a year. We can actually make some impact because we can embed ourselves into the school. We can complement their pastoral, the work of their pastoral team, and they can lean on us for the support. We quite often are very good at engaging very challenging and hard to reach families who perhaps are very suspicious of school or may not have had good experiences of school themselves, or feel that the school is just against their child, but we are able to work with them. And we do, although our work is primarily with the young people, we do recognise that sometimes, especially with one-to-one interventions, we have to include the parents as well, and especially where a child is at risk of permanent exclusion, we will always ask the school to be involved, to have a child, those young men, referred to us before it gets to the point where it can't be turned around, because it's very difficult to get back into mainstream school once a child has been excluded. We have, so going on to, I think I'm talking too much. I looked at the time, actually. Do stop me, Victoria.
Don't worry, I will.
By the end of the three-year period, as I was saying, 3 years is a long time in a young person's life. If we, for example, were working in, well, any of the North Kensington primary schools that we're kind of covering, Bevington, Colville, Kensington Aldridge, Oxford Gardens, St Francis of Assisi, St Thomas, any of those. So if we were to be working, for example, with a young person in year 6 and they went into the North Kensington Primary School or the Kensington RBKC secondary school that we are in, we quite often will have a referral, or we'll take them in year 7, or just kind of take them at the beginning, just to check in with them, not necessarily an actual caseload, but just checking in with them to see how things are, because quite often they can slip through the net before anybody realises what's going on. September is a really busy time in a secondary school, and things can happen very quickly. So we're there, and we also have boys further up the school that we maybe have worked with in year 8, and then 8, 9 and 10, we're still there. So we can kind of see, because it's not just we work with them and then everything's okay. They quite often, the mentoring support that we provide, group or one-to-one, they need really for an individual or that they trust to walk alongside them, and at different points we will pick them up. So over a 3-year period, the impact we can have is quite considerable. We don't have to worry year on year what's going to happen next, about how whether we're going to have to leave this young person who still perhaps needs our help. So that's the good thing about that. And example of a young person we've worked with that illustrates very well the impact of our work. I mean, we've had so many. I'll pick one out because that we were, I remember him, he springs to mind because we started with him. We've been with him in the school that he was in now for 3 years. And he started out without a social worker, ended up with a social worker in the pandemic. So lots of children that happened to, they were not known to services before they went into pandemic. And then when they came out of the pandemic, they were known to services because things broke down within families. And, in order to allow us to support him, he was on a child protection plan. Our intervention was part of that, actually, that we would be supporting him as part of that. And it was up and down, it was rocky, but actually he was engaging with us, and the family was as well, which at points they were not with the school. So we were able to, when he finished in year 11 and managed to get himself an apprenticeship at one of the prestigious hotels in London. We were so proud of him, because really at many times it looked as though he would be excluded and he wouldn't actually make it. And so those successes, we do have lots of successes like that we wish we could have more. Some we don't make, some don't make it, but when they do, we're ever so proud of them.
That's lovely. And you mentioned, what do you think are the ingredients that make the difference? You mentioned having that consistency, so funding for the intervention to continue over a longer period. I presume sort of building trust all those kinds of things. How do you think, what do you think are the things that are key to the successes that you do have?
I think building trust is one of them, and being very transparent about what it is that we are doing, because where families are known to services, they want to know whether you're connected to the local authority or whether you're with the social services. They want to know those things before they will engage with you. They want to know who you are, what you're doing, and who you're reporting back to. And I think the fact that we are an independent charity that works in partnership with the school but is there to really benefit the young people, I think that makes a difference to the families. We are not by any means there to just be friends with them, and we have some hard lessons and some hard difficult conversations to have with them and the families as well, and they take it from us because they recognise that they can trust us and we are working in their best interest, and actually that whatever we say and do is really to get the best out of them, and it's no point us just agreeing with everything. We have to point out the areas, the things that they're doing wrong, and support them to make the changes. And because I recognise that actually they are young men, they're not grown adults, they're actually children. And I think it's the trust, it's the independence, and the fact that we understand very much the communities that we are working with, and the variations and the things that are needed and the competences that are needed to go into those communities and work. And we have a very mixed group. We are future men, but we have very few females, but I quite often find myself representing my team and they wonder, well, where are the men? And there are loads of them, but you're just lucky to have me actually as the head of programs for the team. But we do have lots of men, and lots of very different men to me, you know, lots of different ethnicities and backgrounds are in my team.
I've just got a couple more questions that were just triggered as you were talking. So when we were chatting before, I think everybody joined, we were all agreeing that the pandemic's had a huge impact on young people's mental health and various other things. And we were talking about, you mentioned that the need has increased and the funding hasn't. And then you also said, as you were talking just now, that since you joined the organisation, there's been a huge kind of breakdown in behaviour that you've seen, and more exclusions. What do you think are some of the drivers and the triggers behind that? What's causing this increase in need?
I think, first of all, a lot of the young men that we are supporting, the cohorts that we are working with, are from families they are living in poverty, and they were living in poverty before the pandemic. So they are the ones those families are the ones that are going to feel it the quickest and the sharpest. And, you know, people, when we talk about, you know, people being on furlough, some of the families that we were working with, they don't get furlough. They're on 0 hours contracts. They don't get furlough payments. They just lose their jobs. And so a lot of stress in families as to how they're going to cope, and the uncertainty that we were all feeling was magnified for them because they didn't know where they were going to get the money from to feed their children. And so all of these things, we have the 2 youth hubs that we saw it in the youth hubs as well, because we ended up partnering with Marks and Spencer's, people to give food to people, because we saw very quickly that families that we were the families of the children that were taking part in, you know, participating in our youth clubs in Westminster, and in Westminster, we just, you know, they weren't managing, and so they were coming to us for food, and actually felt confident to take it from us, because there's a lot of shame attached to poverty, and people don't want to take things even though they need them, and they have to trust you that you're not, you know, they're not going to be embarrassed, that you're going to be discreet, and there's all of that as well. And I think in terms of some young people were already kind of not really liking school and struggling with school, and so when you have a pandemic and you don't go in, and then actually you realise, oh, actually, hold on a minute, I actually don't have to go, and I'm not going to go. And nothing's going to happen if I don't go, because I wasn't going in the pandemic and nothing happened. So I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go now. And it's really, you know, it takes a lot to actually bring the focus back on education. Why should we bother, actually? Because everybody can do YouTube and game and make money from that. So what do I actually need this school? How is this relevant to my life now? You know, I can be on Instagram. I can do all sorts of more exciting things. It's boring, school. And the teachers they're not able to hold the attention. The kids have got out of the routine. They're much relaxed. They're in their pajamas all day. And actually, why should they go to school? And really, I think we're trying our best, really. We're trying our best to kind of counter that narrative with, come on, you know, your friends are here. There's lots that you can learn from here that's going to benefit you in the world. And when you go out, and you know that we still all have a need to work and contribute, and you know, just to contribute to society and not just marginalize, be in this situation of being marginalized.
Are you seeing, sorry, I will leave you alone in a minute, but I just have one more question before I move on to Susan. Are you seeing, I know there's much more of a move towards understanding behaviour as a means of communication now, although it does feel like larger institutions may take longer to come around to that idea. How many of the sort of young people at risk of exclusion that you work with have experienced trauma, and their behaviour is really a reflection of that trauma that's maybe not recognised by the people around them?
Lots of them. Lots of them have. And we do take a trauma-informed approach, and I think lots of people recognise the need to take a trauma-informed approach with young people who have had adverse childhood experiences and things that will play out in their behaviour. And it takes a lot of patience and time to do that. I would just say you have to have a lot of patience and time, and the classroom, where the curriculum is really what's being focused on, is quite often not the place to address that in any great depth, because it's not possible. So yes, we do see a lot of those things. We do. And the behaviour from some of our young people is incredibly challenging and incredibly difficult to manage if you're not, you know, if they don't want to engage with you. So I can understand the challenges that schools face. I really can. And we're there to support them as much as, you know, so we can, between us, they can have an impact for these young people.
Thank you, Anne. Well, I'm going to move on and have a quick chat to Susan, but there may be some questions for you at the end, and so don't go anywhere. Susan, hi, welcome.
Hi. Very interesting, thanks, Anne. Anne and I know each other quite well from work in various schools. And yeah, I absolutely sort of concur with all that you've said, Anne, as usual. And in terms of sort of behaviours, communication, I think it absolutely is. And that's, I suppose, where the art psychotherapy and our sort of mental health support comes in, where we're trying to understand what's behind behaviour and the feelings, and give them space to be expressed, thought about and understood. That also then can sort of, you know, enable children to be understood in a way that perhaps they haven't been in the past, and understand the feelings really. What I think is probably very helpful is if I just have a very quick brief chat about what Latimer Community Art Therapy do and who we are, and then I'd like to do a little case study, just show some artwork of a young person, and just give a little bit of a story, because I think that sort of speaks to our work much better. And I think, as Victoria said, we are in an enormous mental health crisis right now. 75% of children wait so long that their condition gets worse. So when they wait on the sort of statutory services waiting lists, and those waiting times can be anything from 8 to 82 days, and sometimes up to 2 years for assessments and various things. And then they also very, very, very concerning. Sorry, that my window's open, so do excuse the noise of the room. Good old St Anne's Road. Very concerning as well is the sort of the antidepressant use, which has rose by over a quarter since between 2016 and 2020, and the statistics for anxiety medication is also very similar, and this is an enormously worrying trend with very little evidence that medication actually helps young people. Right, so I'm just going to share my screen, and then you can we'll just see a little picture, because it's easier to just sort of describe things if I have images, because I am an art therapist. So yeah, right, where are we? Sorry, give me a sec. Right, so Latimer Community Art Therapy is an organisation which it came about after the Grenfell Tower fire. We didn't exist pre-2017. And we have sort of 3 arms of LCAT, but we are interconnected and joined organisation, which is very much community led and grassroots. So we have our Henry Dickens Community Centre, which is our hub of our service, which provides kids clubs and youth clubs and older adult coffee mornings, and was described as the very hub of our community by a member of the community. And then we have our art psychotherapy in schools. We're actually in 19 schools now. So we're 15 in RBKC with a full-ish service. So that means a day or more of art psychotherapy, and 4 schools which we outreach into. We're in the secondary schools now where we weren't before. So that's been over the past couple of years. We're in KA, All Saints and Chelsea Academy. Holland Park, we see a child, and I think we can't talk about our RBKC schools without saying that there is a very big crisis in Holland Park, and that is absolutely negatively impacting our children. And that's something I think, you know, we as an organisation want to focus on, and I'm sure Future Men similarly have thoughts about that, because in terms of the exclusion rates, you know, we're looking at an absolute mess, really. We also have art psychotherapy in the community, which we have a symbiotic relationship with the Henry Dickens kind of kids club and youth club, and we run our open group art psychotherapy services within Henry Dickens. We also do a lot of our outreach into, if you can see the room down here, that's our laundry. So a lot of children and young people, adolescents particularly, attend their art psychotherapy in our laundry room. K+C actually helped us realise this wonderful room. There was an actual laundry, an old disused laundry on the estate, Henry Dickens estate, and we got that kind of purpose made through corporate responsibility, and K+C Foundation gave us that contact and sort of made that kind of happen. And the laundry was built, and the community centre was painted, and toilets done up, and everything absolutely amazing from Waits. And that room is just the most beautiful room, which is so calm and peaceful, and it's well used. And we also have open groups at Venture Centre and St Clement James Centre. So that is sort of overall kind of where we're at with our services. We've got about 350 children in therapy, and we have around about 500 children that attend annually the services at Henry Dickens, between 500 and 600 I think. And then we have but every session we run is usually attended by around about 40 children and young people, apart from our youth club, which has got a little bit lower numbers, around about 20 to 24. So we're well used, well resourced, sadly, we're well used by the community and children, and you know, the resources that we've got available for them, like feeding lunch and, you know, football and games and, you know, homework support and all that stuff kind of adds into the kind of overall holistic view of that LCAT have of children and young people's needs. We are a grassroots organisation, and we're bottom-up structure. So I am the director and founder of LCAT, but all that we do is led by the needs of the children and community that we're in. So I'm very much part of this community, and rather than a sort of top-down managerial system, we have a very bottom-up grassroots system within our organisation. We employ 16 local people in the Henry Dickens, and we have 19 art psychotherapists, all of whom are fully qualified. And we've got a 75% retention rate of therapists, which is the most of any organisation, statutory or voluntary, in the North Kensington area since 2017. Right, I'm just going to move on to talk about a particular young person, because it's really powerful to see the case study and to see the progression over time and the changes, and just how you can use that work to start having conversations. Yeah. With people who are obviously going through a really traumatic time. So thank you for that. I could see we've got a few questions in the chat already, so I just wanted to have some time to address those. And if anyone's got others, please feel free to pop them in. So question for you, Anne. Virginia is asking,
in the work that you do with young men, do you talk about and address attitudes to women and girls in their lives? Oh, you're on mute, Anne. You're muted.
Sorry.
That's it.
Yes, in answer to your question, Virginia, we do always address their attitude as young men towards women and girls, and we see that as part of, you know, the work that we do, because we're in, I think, in a very privileged position when we speak to boys about masculinity and their own development and the types of men that they are and that they want to be. I mean, you know, I've having started out in service delivery, I know, you know, what the types of conversation, the framework that we use to support these boys, our masculinity and boys development element, or a lot of that, these attitudes towards women and girls will come out more so when we're speaking to older boys, because they start to have an opinion on what girls are like and what women do. And when we have things that are topical in the media, such as the cases of, you know, male violence towards women and girls, all of those things we speak about. There was a case of a footballer that was accused of a particular offence against his girl. All of the boys, they're very keen to talk about those things because it involves a young person, you know, a young person that they look up to. And so we are in a we're very well placed to have those conversations with them and challenge behaviours actually, and pose questions around some of the attitudes that they might have, because we think that's important.
Great, thank you. And one for you, Susan, is how do you build longer term resilience? Because obviously your intervention will be for a specific period of time. I know we're partnering you for 3 years, but people's issues are complex and ongoing. How do you kind of build resilience for them beyond your intervention?
I mean, I think it's sort of building resilience doesn't happen through a workshop. It happens through an experiential experience of feeling able to manage and cope. And it happens through experiencing sort of a safe, trusting, therapeutic relationship in which young people can question things and understand their internal world a bit more, and therefore, you know, build a capacity to manage in the world, really. So I think, you know, we do work longer term with young people because we do believe that mental health is an issue that needs time and space for our young people, and that's what they ask for. They don't ask for short-term work, they ask for longer-term work, and they ask, you know, for you know, a protracted period of therapy, in which they can grow, build, and develop across, you know, life transitions as well. I think is quite important.
Thank you. The question for Anne from Chris: are the sessions you do with boys confidential, or do you have to report back to the school some of the content or individual issues?
We do, Chris, we do report back to schools, but we don't talk about the minutiae, the detail of the conversations that we are having. So we will talk in general terms about, so for example, if something has happened, an incident has happened, for example, you know, we might go into the school once or twice a week, and an incident has happened between that time, the school will tell us about it, and we will, for example, have a conversation with the young person about what happened. They may say some very, you know, use some very choice words about the members of staff in question and the kind, you know, their opinions and what they think. We don't go into detail about who said what, and we'll talk in terms about, well, we had a conversation about this and we agreed that perhaps this might be another way of, if a situation like this were to occur again, we looked at some strategies for how we might minimize the possibility of an escalation. And this is what the young person said that they could do. What do you think? You know, we try to find solutions. We'll go into detail about things that perhaps a young person finds challenging that a teacher could help them with, or if they need a timeout pass, or if they can't, they're sitting in the wrong, you know, could we move them because they're around friends and other young people that are triggering them, or they can't concentrate, that kind of things. But we don't go into detail. They're confidential in terms of, apart from our safeguarding responsibility where that would trump everything, we're there to support the young person, and we don't give the details, no, but we do give a general outline of what's been discussed, if that answers the question.
I guess for both of you, that safeguarding is the tricky bit, because what you're trying to do is build trust, but occasionally there will be disclosures that you absolutely have to share. Yeah. I mean, how do you come back from that with a young person? That's to either of you. I get, how do you frame? Look, I know I said everything was confidential, but this one thing you've told me, I have to report that.
I never sort of say that. Confidential. We're very clear that, you know, we try to keep this space as confidential as we can, but obviously we have a duty of care to protect you, and if there's things that I feel are making you unsafe, then that may be something that I have to report. I'm very clear to young people who that person is that I have to report to, because I think what raises anxiety is when you say I have to report this and then they don't know who. So I'll say, you know, I'm going to have to speak to Mr. Grace, or I'm going to have, you know, so I'll name a specific person in school rather than it just be anybody, because that raises anxiety for young people. And I also believe, and I'm sure Anne you agree, that young people tell us things for a reason, you know, and they are worried usually about something, and if they're telling us something that's incredibly difficult, whether it's an abusive situation or a safety issue in the community, they're telling us because they don't really know how to manage it and they want us to help them. So I suppose that, you know, that and obviously they might resist that, but essentially I think, you know, fundamentally that is what they want.
And I would just add a little bit as to say that I agree with Susan. We never say it's confidential. I say that it's a space for us to talk, but we make, in the beginning, we will say in the groups and the one-to-ones, your safety and your security is paramount to us. And if anything happens or you disclose anything in this in our interactions that makes me think that your safety or your welfare is at risk, I say we've got a responsibility to you and your families to make sure that you're safe. And I give an example of the types of things, and although they have, you know, they do have this snitch code that they like to adhere to, kids, but I say I'm an adult and I can't be part of that. You know, I've got to take care of you, and your families would expect it, and you wouldn't expect me to just leave you to go out into a situation where you were going to be harmed and not say anything. And I said, do you understand that? And they say, yeah, it's okay. I said, so we continue. And so that I've told them, and they can't, you know, It is a very difficult one, and you do have to tread a line, actually, because you do want to build that trust. But we've got our responsibility as professionals, and we need to, you know, it's important that we adhere to that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try and squeeze in one last question just before we end the session, which was just about, Anne, you mentioned you see differences in the young people you work with in different boroughs. Can you tell us more about the needs and challenges that are specific to the K+C boys and young men?
Yes, we've got, for example, we've got in RBKC, we've got a particular demographic in RBKC that, for example, is very different to Bermondsey. We've got a very large white working class population in Bermondsey where we work, but not so much in RBKC, the boys that are being referred to us. So there's lots of different things that intersect with the issues that might come up for them, you know, race and class, different cultures, sometimes a lack of, you know, communication between them and their parents, you know, things like that, or not really understanding the system, sometimes, you know, having particular attitudes that are, you know, are prevalent within certain cultures that may come up against, you know, be a problem for school, that type of thing. I mean, I think generally the issues that we see right across the board are very similar for young men in London, but I think there are different things, race, class, ethnicity, poverty, those things, different things that intersect to create a more individual picture for our young men.
Thank you. We are bang on time. I'm so proud of myself. It's 10:30. So thank you so much, both of you. That was so interesting. I'm actually going to re-watch the recording because I was concentrating so much on hosting that I couldn't absorb everything just so I can hear it all again. And we are going to send this out to lots of people who wanted to come but couldn't join us this morning and asked if they could see the recording. But thank you both so much, and thank you to everyone who joined. I hope you found it interesting. We're hoping to do more of these with the other projects that we've partnered with over the next sort of 6 to 12 months. So keep your eyes peeled and please join if you can. But thank you, Anne and Susan especially.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
It's just fantastic.
Thank you. Well, listen, enjoy the rest of your day. Try and stay in the shade. Keep your fan on.
Thank you. Bye.
See you soon. Take care. Bye.